I've been covering the MMA world and the pro wrestling world too, kind of another niche side interest of mine, for a really long time now. And I get emails and messages periodically. People ask me what I think about the prospects of a guy named CM Punk as an actual mixed martial artist. If you don't know who CM Punk is, his real name is Phil Brooks. He is a professional wrestler who is primarily known for his work in the WWE, but he's been doing the indie circuit stuff forever. He's in Ring of Honor. He was in the TNA for like a month or two. Well, anyway, he's one of the most popular wrestlers out there. Allegedly, he quit the organization in January, but since it's pro wrestling and everything's work shoot. I don't really know if that's true or not, but since he didn't show up at WrestleMania, the biggest show of the year, that has people thinking maybe he really did, part ways with the company. And as soon as he distanced himself from WWE, the rumors started swirling that he might be going into MMA, Brock Lesnar style. And people asked my comments on it, and I thought, that's pretty boring. I mean, what can I say? But when I started thinking about it, I realized by talking about this whole CM Punk issue in MMA, we can talk about a lot of the problems that the UFC, and in many ways mixed martial arts as a sport itself, is kind of having at the moment. So we get to CM Punk in just a minute, but let's kind of state the obvious here. When you look at the UFC and the extension of mixed martial arts, you got to look at it in 5-year periods. Starting in 2005 with Ultimate Fighter, you saw a 5-year crest where the sport just absolutely grew exponentially and it got super popular. And there were shows doing 1 million pay-per-view buys, and you had all these stars. You had Chuck Liddell, and you had Brock Lesnar, and you had Quentin Jackson, and you had Anderson Silva and George St. Pierre, and even outside the UFC, you still had Fedor Emelianenko out there, and you had stuff going on in Pride, and you had all these other Japanese organizations like Sengoku and Dream and K1. So it was really an entire industry, plus all the other B organizations in the U.S., like Strikeforce and Elite XC, who all had network TV shows of their own at one point in time. Funny how things change. And for 5 years, things were really great. Everything is on the upswing. It was nothing but exponential growth. And then sometime around 2011, ironically, I think around the same time as the Fox Network TV deal, that's when things started really going downhill for the UFC. That's probably for a lot of reasons. I think the most obvious reason is because that's when we started seeing sort of the separation of their old stars. You look from that 2005 to 2010 time period where UFC was just on an upward swing, totally growing like crazy. The 5 biggest stars of that era were Chuck Liddell, Jackson, Lesnar, GSP, Anderson Silva. Okay, by 2011, Chuck Liddell had retired. Lesnar and Jackson were both on their way out. And Silva and GSP at their respective peaks of their career, but obviously they've been on a downward trajectory ever since. So the 5 biggest pay-per-view draws that you've had over really the last 10 years, completely gone. Jackson gone, Liddell gone for sure, Lesnar gone for sure. Silva and GSP aren't officially retired, but they're sidelined indefinitely. They're probably not going to fight this year. They're your 2 biggest draws without a question, and you don't have access to them. My apologies. So the problem the UFC is having, well, that's obviously problem number 1 for why the good times ended. The other reason why the good times ended was, and this is my opinion, I'm not sure I can get others to agree with me, but that's when we started seeing the oversaturation of the market. There's a point in time where a UFC show, you get maybe like 1 every month. You'll get a UFC pay-per-view, and you'll get like a special Fight for the Troops or something like that on Spike TV. Then you wait another month. So it wasn't like we're being bombarded by mixed martial arts every single week like you do now. And in fact, I think at the end of May, they actually have 2 pay-per-views. They have 2 cards going on simultaneously. They have the one in Brazil with Junior Dos Santos and Stipe Miocic, and they have the there's another one. I can't remember where it's going on. I can't remember the main event, but they have 2 shows going on simultaneously, and that's part of Dana White's huge grandiose vision of turning the UFC into the world sport. He's been saying this for years. He wants to do basically what the NFL and the Premier League does, where on any given Saturday night you have like 20 shows going on across the world. And he has this exponential growth, and eventually he wants to have like a World Cup MMA or something like that, or a national football league like organization where you take the best from all these countries, the best homegrown fighters from China, the best homegrown fighters from Brazil, versus the best homegrown fighters from Europe, homegrown guys from Oceania. That's kind of his vision, and it's really, really, ambitious. And it's not horribly realistic, but since he has the Fox deal and he has all the money and you don't have to pay these guys anything, that's kind of different from other sports because in UFC, the athletes don't cost anything. It's all production, really. And they can do this. They can book tons of shows. It's not really that costly to do it. And that's part of their mission, their 20-year plan, to be this gigantic, super-duper, huge, global empire. And you look at all these things, I think maybe the problem is in conjunction with the fighters leaving the promotion or being sidelined, plus market saturation, plus this probably not actually implementable global expansion program. You also don't have competition because over that time frame from 2011 up until now, all of the UFC competition disappeared because they got bought or they just vanished. There's no such thing as Japanese MMA anymore. That's gone. That completely died out. There are no really decent Japanese-grown fighters in the world right now. There seems to be guys coming out of South Korea, some guys coming out of China. UFC is definitely putting a lot of money in developing that, and that might come to fruition maybe 5 or 10 years from now. We'll see. But they're definitely investing a lot in those markets. But you don't have Strikeforce, you don't have you still have Bellator, but Bellator and Suzuki Fighting are way, way second down the line compared to UFC. So those four things, the UFC is kind of an unquestioned monopoly, and they've got everything anchored in the Fox deal, and they have all these guys that were their old stars that have disappeared, and they have the huge expansion where now you have women's fighting, and you have the featherweights and the flyweights, and you import all the WEC guys over. And you have these huge rosters, and you're trying to internationalize the sport, and you have TV pretty much every week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and people are bored. People are bored because it's losing the novelty. It's losing the interest. There's too much stuff going on. You're not really expecting people to sit down and watch, Big Nog against Roy Nelson and be excited about it. I know some guys that have been watching every UFC show for like the last 5 years, and even they're like, okay, I can't do it anymore. I can't do the UFC Fight Pass stuff. It's just too much. The fights aren't interesting. They don't have that much impact. They're just doing it for sheer saturation's sake. So that's a problem that you're having in UFC now. And on top of that, you don't have the stars anymore. You don't have Silva, you don't have GSP. So now you're trying to get over guys like John Jones and Cain Velasquez who are not having that same appeal. They're not drawing 1 million people per headline card. Now, Velasquez did, but that was only because against Brock Lesnar, but he hasn't done it since then. And now they're kind of putting all their eggs in the Ronda Rousey basket. I was calling it a biscuit. Sorry, I'm kind of hungry. They're trying to put all their money in the Ronda Rousey basket when, obviously, from the pay-per-view in February, which didn't draw anywhere near 1 million buys, that she's maybe not the huge breakout star that Dana White wants her to be. And even if she is, well, you don't have anybody in the female division to kind of be the anti-Rousey to make things interesting. And plus, all the other divisions, anything lower than lightweight, nobody cares about. Jose Aldo's too dominant. Nobody really takes the bantamweights, or especially the flyweight, seriously. And because of all this, the fighter shortages, and the fact they're just putting on way too many shows and trying to internationalize the market, and you have the introduction of these superfluous weight classes, you've got pay-per-views coming up like UFC 173, where the main event is TJ Dillashaw against Renan Barrera, where you're actually asking people to spend $55.99 to watch that. Or even better yet, the pay-per-view after that, where you have Demetrius Johnson taking on Ale Bagnatov. Nobody in the right mind is going to pay money to see that. That should not be a free show on the Fox network, let alone on pay-per-view. So as you can see, there are quite a few problems there. And right now, as a hardcore MMA fan, I'm starting to lose interest myself. It's hard to get excited about Demetrius Johnson. It's hard to get excited about TJ Dillashaw. And if you do have some really interesting matchups, and let's come out and say it, you look at most of the UFC weight classes now, lightweight and the welterweight and the middleweight, they're very exciting because you have so many new fighters with different styles that are so versatile, and you've got all these changes of guards. You got Johnny Hendricks in there, and you got Chris Weidman, and you have like the entire widening of the divisions. You have guys that are like 205 dropping to 185, 185 guys dropping to 170. It's interesting because you're in a bunch of fresh matchups, and this may produce some entertaining cards for people that are already fans, but it's not drawing anyone new. And because guys like Johnny Hendricks and Chris Weidman and John Jones and Cain Velasquez and Ronda Rousey don't have the same appeal that a Brock Lesnar or a Chuck Liddell or these other people would have, the UFC's kind of stuck with this huge network TV deal where they've got pretty much free access to the airwaves, put as much stuff as they want. And they have the generally low production values. Well, not production values like the TV, but I mean actually putting on a show doesn't really cost that much. And the gates are usually always pretty decent. So they have all that going on. You got to wonder, are you starting to kind of alienate more fans than you are attracting new ones? And that's where CM Punk comes in. CM Punk, he's not a Brock Lesnar. He's not a guy who actually has experience. Brock Lesnar at least had one professional fight before joining the UFC, and that was sort of a marketing engineered ploy, I admit, but he's actually a really good fighter, and he has the NCAA background to back it up. And hey, he was a heavyweight champion. He beat Frank Mir, he beat Randy Couture, he beat Shane Carwin. He beat some pretty impressive guys in one of the most daunting divisions in mixed martial arts at that time. CM Punk has never had a professional MMA fighter. He's had an amateur MMA fight. Unlike Lesnar, he's not some gigantic 300-pound, 7-foot-tall freak of nature. So he doesn't have that immediate aesthetic appeal. And additionally, he doesn't have the actual athlete background. Lesnar, he tried out for the Vikings, a legit NCAA wrestler. He had all that going on in his favor. CM Punk does not have that. He doesn't have the athletic background in the traditional sense. Definitely doesn't have the professional fighting or even the amateur fighting background. I mean, he's monkeyed around, but he's clearly not a real fighter with Brock Lesnar potential. So why are we talking about him? Why is this such an important issue among the MMA community and pro wrestling fans? Well, it's important because when you look at the current state of mixed martial arts, I've noticed among my peer group, the guys in their late 20s, early 30s with disposable income, I've noticed a lot more people into the professional wrestling than they are the mixed martial arts. And that's very intriguing to me because you kind of figured MMA the entire last 10 years has been marketed straight to that audience. 18 to 34-year-old males, guys like to drink beer and look at women and drive motorcycles. But the generation that I'm seeing coming up now, they're not really interested in UFC. They're more interested in the theatrical stuff that the WWE gives them. So that's why you can go to a college campus now and you have to talk about guys like Daniel Bryan or Bryan Danielson or CM Punk or some of the other guys, and they're excited. They like the showmanship. They like the theatricality. Everybody's into the Avengers and comic books and all that stuff, all the really Joss Whedon-y soap opera stuff. And that's what WWE is. It's soap operatic professional wrestling. And CM Punk has been one of the biggest stars in the North American scene for sure. And he has a huge, across the spectrum, appeal to a lot of pro wrestling fans. And despite what some of these really great experts say, and they're guys that I really respect, guys like Dave Meltzer and even Paul Heyman, who have been saying that the UFC and WWE divide is really small. Like, you can kind of win over UFC fans from the WWE. That's not what I've been seeing. Most people I talk to that are really hardcore in MMA absolutely despise pro wrestling. They hate it. They don't want to talk about it. You bring up guys like CM Punk or even Brock Lesnar and they get just foaming at the mouth. And conversely, the guys who are in the WWE absolutely hate UFC. They think it's boring, all the fighters look alike. So what you're hearing from the experts is one thing, but from what I'm seeing empirically, those two niche fields are not really overlapping as far as fan bases go. So with the CM Punk thing, and you look at where the UFC is now, where you have Ali Bognatov and TJ Dillashaw headlining actual pay-per-views in the year of our Lord 2014, would it really be that horrible of an idea to perhaps draw in new fans, to get the pro wrestling people in, perhaps kind of get people that aren't into UFC to perhaps even order and spend $60 on a UFC show to watch CM Punk go in there and just get slammed. For real. And I think the equation is, you talk about UFC being a sport where it's all about you give the fighters who actually deserve to fight the spotlight, and that's very admirable. It's very admirable, but from a business standpoint, it's bad because you're not giving people entertaining fights. You're not drawing more masses to the audience. And when you have guys, once again, I hate to keep picking on these guys, but nobody cares about Ali Bogdanov. Nobody cares about Demetrius Johnson. Nobody cares about TJ Dillashaw. You're not going to expand the audience. You're not going to get new eyes. You're not going to win new fans by doing that. So my suggestion about CM Punk MMA, the guy does not have a long-term virtue. He's too old. He's probably undersized, does not have the training. But I think he should. I think the UFC should sign him to a one-fight deal. World Series of Fighting, Bellator aren't going to do it because, well, they might. But he would get more money if he signed with World Series of Fighting or Bellator, because they'd throw the entire money bags at him to get them to go over there and fight, I don't know, Christian Mupaba or whatever that guy's name is, or John Fitch at 205. That'd be a hoot. So CM Punk, he could make a lot of money by going to one of these B-listers, but UFC's where the eyes are. That's where you want to be. And if you're Dana White, you could probably, sign CM Punk for a 1-5 deal for what is relatively chump change because, wrestlers don't make any money. You can give him like $250,000, give him a co-main event slot on UFC 176, 177 when you have like a really weak main event, like a lackluster featherweight title fight. You have CM Punk co-main event. And before you come out and say, is it kind of, detrimental to the sport? Are you kind of selling out a little? My response to that is can be elaborated on in 2 words. James Toney. You gave James Toney, who for what it's worth is a really great boxer, one of the best boxers of the last 25 years. You look at his statistics, look at his win-loss record. You gave this dude who's completely unintelligible a co-main event fight against Randy Couture in one of the absolute biggest debacles ever in a UFC Octagon. And it was entertaining. I mean, it was not a competitive matchup at all. But the sheer just theatricality of it. Where you got James Toney come in there and he's talking trash, and CM Punk will talk trash for a long time to kind of build up a program. And Randy Couture, all the UFC fans were behind him 100%. They hated Toney. And, it was a one-off show on what was pretty much a forgettable overall pay-per-view. What was the harm? And with that in mind, I think that's why giving CM Punk that one fight in the UFC would actually be a win situation for UFC all around. No matter who CM Punk fights in the UFC, to this day, he's going to lose. Let's get that out of the equation. He's not going to win. So what I would advise doing is, if you're Dana White and Joe Silva and all these guys, for Teeter Brothers, you give CM Punk the money. You give him $250,000 for one night's work. And the thing about CM Punk, he's listed about 220, but I doubt that. He's probably close to like 205. What you do is you take CM Punk, you put him co-main events, you let him talk trash for like a month in advance, 2 months in advance, work the crowds, get all the pro wrestling fans in there, get them excited. And you put him in the Octagon against a 185-pounder who you've had trouble getting over. Maybe someone where English is not their first language, perhaps their fights haven't been the most exciting, they're really great, you're trying to vault them into the pantheon to kind of get them over so you can have them go up against guys like Chris Weidman or Lyoto Machida in title fights. And that's why I think with CM Punk, that's where you really want to have him go in at 205 against a natural 185-pounder in a catchweight bout at like 190 or even 210. And the 2 names I'll make a jump to me for potential CM Punk opponents, both in the 185-pound division. First up, Francis Carmont, a guy who is a top 5, I think, middleweight fighter right now, currently in the UFC. Maybe it's not official UFC rankings, but close enough. Who's really hasn't had entertaining fights since he's been in there. You put him in there, make him the face of actual fighting. He goes in there, he drubs CM Punk. He gets over with the crowd, and you make a star out of him. You kind of do what you did with Frank Mir against Brock Lesnar in their first fight, where you kind of, remake Frank Mir and you get him become like the superhero, the champion of the sport against this loudmouth caricature. And what is basically a freak show fight. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's not going to be anything even remotely resembling athletic competition. And the other guy would be Ronaldo Souza, who is a legit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu maniac. And if you want to have something really entertaining, have him go in there and he's going to stretch CM Punk. He's going to snap his neck in half or something. He's going to tap him out and just make it look really grisly. And with that in mind, he might not fight then. Okay, do it against Francis Carmont, because if he fights Ronaldo Souza, he knows he's going to get hurt. Carmont, he might stand a chance. Or really any of these guys on 185. Go get Alan Belcher, the dude with the Johnny Cash tattoo on his arm. Some guy who's maybe not quite a title contender yet, but someone who's been around forever, who can talk trash, can be marketable. Michael Bisping, a Tim Kennedy, a Luke Rockhold, all these guys can become superstars by beating the crap out of CM Punk. And I don't see what the harm is. Don't sign on to anything more than one fight, because that's just stupid. And don't keep importing guys. But I think just from a sheer business standpoint, you're not going to do 1 million buys, but you're going to get a lot more. You're going to get at least 100,000 extra. And as I said before, what's the harm? You already let James Toney do it. You might as well let CM Punk fight. So there you go. That's just what I think they should do. I think CM Punk, you've got a really good opportunity to win over some fans, or at least increase a one-time pay-per-view buy. And, if you're trying to grow the sport, or you're trying to get new people interested, or you're just trying to make the fan base a little bit more versatile, that's what you got to do, because, as is, if you're asking anyone out there, MMA fan, wrestling fan, sports fan in general, what they'd either see CM Punk take on Tim Kennedy, or Luke Rockhold at 210, or they'd rather see Ali Baghdad or TJ Dillashaw in a main event. Well, I think the answer right there, no matter how freakish, is quite apparent.